Hello and welcome, one and all. My name is Brandon Martin, and this is a presentation that I gave back at the S.E.E.D conference in August 2018 at Skatopia, located in Rutland, Ohio. The title of my presentation is Fake Ass Punks and What It Means to Be a True Rebel, and without further ado, let's get started. To get us started, let's go over a few of my caveats. First, this is not all my work. It is an aggregated synthesis of occult knowledge, put forward by a vast amount of researchers. If I happen to have seen further than others, it is only because I have stood upon the shoulders of giants and now seek to help shoulder others by raising them with this knowledge. The information contained within this presentation could not possibly accomplish covering all aspects of the topics that I have chosen, nor am I claiming that I have the totality of that knowledge. I am only here to share what I have come to learn and understand as some of the most important hidden knowledge out there. Even though there will be brazenly blanket statements, I am not attempting to convince anyone to believe anything contained in this presentation. I only ask that you keep an open mind and to seriously consider this information provided. I'm only looking to influence you into doing your own due diligence into researching these topics for yourself. The worst thing that you could do is blindly believe what I say here today and take it without doing your homework. True authentic punks should find no offense in the words I share here today, but the inauthentic might be offended, and to that I say, get as offended as you like. This is not intended to be fear-mongering nor a war cry for a violent uprising, though some of this presentation is combative, and I make no bones about that, and could make you upset. My intentions are that of healing, true care, and solutions. My purpose for sharing this information is not to be liked, to be popular, nor is it to make money. I do this because I realize that we are living in times of universal deceit and that the vast majority of people in this world are in an overwhelming state of ignorance. In fact, it is because I understand this information that it places me in a position of moral obligation to attempt in the arduous task of communicating this information to others, in a hope that it helps them to come to a deeper understanding of the world within them and around them. In no way am I trying to claim that I am an authority in this matter. Actually, I am completely against all forms of man's authority. Nor am I claiming to know it all. Actually, I am only seeking to clear the confusion of this seemingly taboo topic by looking at what is and is not. I am only attempting to aid in the process of clearing the air to come to an understanding of the punk ideology and help guide us on the path to freedom. Should you just take this at face value, you will learn nothing. Stay and listen to the whole thing, otherwise you will not grasp the underlying message of the presentation. That is, if you wish to take real value from this presentation. This presentation is a tapestry, so you need to watch the entirety of it to take in the totality of the value that I'm trying to bring to you. And I spent a lot of work to bring this and put this together, so I hope you find something in it that is beneficial. Only the ones who are locked in their own ego bullshit will seek to misinterpret or mock and ridicule this presentation. Those who would do so fear to come to a true understanding because of the possibility that they have been wrong in their own beliefs and behaviors when it comes to this topic. What this presentation is not about. This presentation is not about the history of punk music. So if you were expecting me to talk about punk genres and specific bands or specific individuals in these bands, I'm not going to be mentioning any names or anything like that. I feel that we need to stick to the underlying causality and get to the root of the problems that we're facing instead of the outer shell. So we're going to be mainly focusing on psychology. This will not be about the co-opting and corruption of the music industry and its connections to the dark occult, though, like I just stated, it will be about the underlying psychology that leads to those connections and relationships. So this will not be about what most consider to be punk or rebellion. So you might have to discard or set to the side your pre-existing vague definitions of the terms punk and rebellion. I will be giving the etymological definitions of these later on. But for now, I would just say hold it in your mind, know that, and compare and contrast it to what I bring here today and see how it lines up. But most likely it might not be where I'm coming from. And over here on the right side we have Bill Hicks, one of the best comedians, and he spoke out frequently about the corruption in the system. And he says your beliefs, they're just that. They're nothing. They're just how you were taught and raised. That doesn't make them real. The first step of change is to become aware of your own bullshit. And this is some of that bullshit that we're going to be going through here in this presentation. So we're going to be looking at what punks wrongfully resist and how it continues to persist. So they wrongfully resist the truth that there is a prevalence of hedonism and self-loathing in the punk community that prevents progression in consciousness towards true freedom. They resist the truth that there is a right brain dominance in the punk community which has led to the lack of physical and mental growth. They refuse to accept the existence of the occult ruling class that is at work in our world. Though some people do talk about a lot of the elites, it really seems to me that they still don't fundamentally grasp the underlying immense proportions of their scale and power, and how important it is for us to educate ourselves and defend against it, which connects to the refusal of natural law and the objective morality, the denial of the requirements for true freedom. The desire for freedom is on the wane or even becoming obsolete to the modern punk. The goals of a punk today is playing dress-up, entertainment, abuse of drugs, and being part of a scene rather than self-education, spiritual uplift, and ending slavery. Most so-called punks have no true knowledge about the world of the occult nor about natural law. They have been duped into social groupthink through self-induced hypnopedic conditioning. It would be more accurate to call these people hipsters in costumes or the mannequins of freedom. And that's what we have on the right side of this image here, is a bunch of mannequins dressed up, just playing their part, just standing there doing nothing, every once in a while paying some lip service towards freedom, but not really acting, just looking the part and hanging out. Most punks only pay lip service to freedom, unfortunately. The overwhelming vast majority of so-called punks still do not recognize or comprehend the causal factors for human slavery. Thus, they have no bearing on how to attain and maintain true freedom. The punk movement today has no progression towards freedom because it is stuck in a deep self-absorbed psychopathology of narcissism, solipsism, egoism, hedonism, and escapism. They are locked in the realm of effects or symptoms where there is no power to create real change. They think that the issues we face today are only political or financial rather than spiritual problems rooted in consciousness. Punks do not know their enemy. There is and has been a deep, dark occult agenda within these movements to socially engineer this subclass of people, as well as many others, for the purpose of sabotaging the possibility of true rebels standing up and resisting the status quo of the elite ruling class, co-opting and assimilating the punk ideology into the culture, normalizing and embellishing it to the point that it has become part of the ideologies that it stood radically against. Punks do not understand their enemy as an interconnected worldwide group of occult master psychologists who holds and wields such knowledge to create a power differential amongst the classes of society, to exploit and enslave those who are ignorant of that knowledge. What is the definition of rebel? Rebel is from the Latin rebellare. Re, meaning opposite, against, back, or again. In simple words, to do over. Bellare, which is ultimately rooted in duelum, means quite good, quite brave, actions of valor, inclined to fighting, war waged against government by some portions of its subjects. And I thought we might go ahead and add in what is the definition of revolution, because these are obviously intimately related. Revolution is from the Latin revolvita or re-revolviere, to overturn, overthrow, roll back, unroll, unwind. Re, again, means opposite, against, back, or again. And volvere, to roll or to turn. So we can see that this is about turning. Think of a turning of a wheel, or think of a turning of a cycle, the ebb and flow. So we can see that a revolution is about overturning something, overthrowing it, rolling it over, unwinding something, like overthrowing slavery, turning it over, giving back the power to the people, bringing back freedom. And this revolution is a revolution of consciousness. This is not about violent uprising. If we look in our history, we can see that physical revolutions in the modern term, or the modern thought of the idea, is always going to lead to more control in the long run. It ultimately has to be done in consciousness. Long-term freedom can only be maintained and achieved through the ascension of collective consciousness and the understanding of natural law principles, but especially living in harmony with that. So a working definition of rebellion: repeating valorous actions that are quite good and brave, which wage war against all forms of mind control and slavery. Going back to the definition of revolution, volviere is also in turn rooted in volt or voltum. And volt has a very esoteric significance, but obviously it's voltage, or to volt, meaning to launch or to project in an arch over something. Or an arc, and I just thought I would add that in there. So there's the power of L, electricity, within this as well. So to bring back the power of L, to revolt, to reinitiate that energy that is needed, to reinitiate that spark that is needed. Okay? Now I also want to say that though long-term freedom can only be done through a revolution, a collective revolution of consciousness, that doesn't mean that physical rebellion is not legitimate when it comes down to it. So there will be a place and a time where physical rebellion will be necessary, and it's very close right now. It is extremely close, a lot closer than what a lot of people think, because most people are living in a delusional box. And like I said from the beginning, this is not about trying to spread fervor or a violent revolution or to bring blood to the streets. But I am saying you guys better be ready for when that happens, because it might happen, and it is likely to happen. Though I don't want it to happen, I will still be ready, and ready to fight till my death for freedom when it comes to it, to protect my loved ones and to protect the people of this world and the animals of this world. And people need to get that through their head, that they need to be more courageous and valorous when it comes to this. So there is a legitimate revolution in that sense as well. Just like our founding fathers. A lot of people might not agree with that. I'm not saying there wasn't other influences or manipulatory scenarios going on, but I am saying it was a legitimate thing to do at that time. All great change in the entire history of the human species has come about by people being different and rebelling against the normal and going against the grain and fighting the tide of the groupthink. Not all punks are true rebels, and to depict this, I use the allegorical film Gremlins, at least the two main characters, the protagonist, Gremlin, Gizmo on the left, who I feel is a good depiction of a true rebel and punk, and then the one on the right, who looks like the cool guy, and he seems like, you know, he would be what modern punks actually are. You know, people who go out and violate other people, steal from their friends, backstab people that they care about, you know, but they look cool, right? Not fighting for freedom, but, you know, they got the shades and they look cool, and everybody likes them. You know, everybody likes Spike, but they don't respect the honor and discipline of Gizmo and his true rebellious and punk attitude. The truth is, you are in a war, the war on consciousness, and it has been here for thousands of years. The word government comes from the Latin governo governare, which means to control, and mens mentes, which means the state of or condition of, or which is actually rooted in the mind, because for anything to be a condition of, it has to start in the mind. So this is where we get our word mental from as well. So mens mentes means the state of mind or condition of the mind. So the word government literally means to control the mind. Government is a group of people that imagine to possess the right to rule over others by way of violence. The existence of government by its very nature and definition is the war on your mind. Government is slavery. Most people are living in ignorance, stuck in a fear-based consciousness and a denial of the truth that they are in a mental, spiritual, and physical war. We literally are held under duress and coercion every day by the state and government and its enforcers, known as order followers. But most have become desensitized to that truth. This condition consists of a comfortably numb subservience to the status quo. Truth, by its very nature, is at war with mind control and deceit. And to depict this, there's a child sitting in front of a mind control box. And I like to say that that's the hand, the hidden hand, the hand of government or the hand of the order followers, you know, destroying the mind of the youth. Government, protecting and serving the hell out of you. A very small number of people now know that government is completely unnecessary and that human society would, on a practical level, work far better without it. Regardless of which works better, a society without a coercive state is the only moral choice we have. as it is the only choice that does not support and condone the initiation of violence against innocent people. Truly, government is an illusion, and it is the belief in that illusion that must be combated. The effects of that belief are quite real, but the belief itself is not. This is the same for authority, which is the root of the belief in government. The belief in authority is the falsehood that some are masters who get to issue arbitrary commands based upon moral relativity and enforced by violence, while others are slaves who have a moral obligation to obey those commands set by the masters and enforce the violence. That's what government is. It is a disease masquerading as its own cure. Rebellion is not all one way. Rebellion is a double-edged sword. It is a tool, and its results of good or ill are determined upon the level of consciousness wielding that tool. The two sides of rebellion, the authentic versus the inauthentic. So these are some characteristics of that double-edged sword. These are the characteristics that I feel align with the authentic rebel and authentic punk, and then the inauthentic punk. So the authentic is harmonized with due to knowledge, understanding, and free will choice. The inauthentic is conformed with due to ignorance, fear, and trauma. The authentic punk or rebel is unwavering on his or her principles. The inauthentic is wavering or based upon relative principles or no principles at all. The authentic knows change is possible, thus they act in spite of fear. The inauthentic does not think change is possible, thus does not act and accepts the default condition of slavery. The authentic has channeled their aggression to be actively involved in positive change. The inauthentic uses unchanneled aggression in sporadic modes of behavior, very unhealthy aggression, harmful and violent. And there is a difference. The authentic punk and rebel knows what rights are and understands natural law. The inauthentic does not know what rights are, or they don't believe in them, nor do they understand natural law, or they don't believe in it. Your belief is irrelevant. The authentic punk and rebel resists slavery at all cost. The inauthentic claim that they are against the immoral state, but really loves the state and obeys, but thinks they are disobeying. So, what I mean by this is that the authentic like to play the role, like I was talking about earlier, the mannequins of freedom, just putting on the costume, and they'll pay lip service and say, yeah, we're against the immoral state, but when it comes to actually living through that idea, it's completely different. The authentic punk and rebel speaks the truth at all cost. They are not interested in censorship of the truth. The inauthentic does not speak the truth, for the most part. The inauthentic does not speak the truth, and is about self-censorship or the censorship of others. The authentic puts freedom before happiness in spite of the fear to lose wants or safety, but is strategic in their plan to end slavery. The inauthentic puts happiness and pleasure before freedom because of the fear of lack of. The authentic understands that morality is objective. The inauthentic thinks morality is relative. Thus, their aggression gets channeled into violence, riots, and theft, or the violation of other people's rights. The authentic understands order following is antithetical to freedom. The inauthentic supports order followers. I've actually seen punks that were order followers. How absurd. You know, they're not real punks. The inauthentic also is about fashionism. They play dress up and they are conformist. They also lack self-responsibility and self-respect. They also have an escapist mindset. They want to run away from responsibility and their moral obligation to help end slavery. True punks are authentic rebels. And I believe Jesus was a true punk and an authentic rebel. Get as offended as you like about that statement. Jesus was an anarchist, if you understand his allegory. He was standing against the corrupt religious institutions of his time, the government institutions, and the order followers of his time. A true punk is an authentic rebel and is actively involved in the revolution and evolution of human consciousness to help end slavery and unnecessary suffering in the world. Knowledge of natural law is needed for the revolution of human consciousness. So what is natural law? Natural law is a set of knowable, universal, inherent, objective, non-man-made, eternal, and immutable conditions, which is the governing dynamic of the consequences of behaviors, for beings with the capacity to understand the difference between violence and force, or right action from wrong action. So, in simple terms, for beings with the capacity for holistic intelligence. Natural law is all about understanding objective morality. So this is natural law versus man's law. Natural law, based upon truth and principles, inherent to reality and creation. Harmonized with due to knowledge and understanding. Universal, exists and applies anywhere in the universe regardless of location. Eternal and immutable, exists and applies for as long as existence exists and cannot be changed. Man's law, however, is based upon dogmatic belief, constructs of perception, complied with due to fear, coercion, and punishment. Differs with location based upon the whims of perception, which is moral relativism. Differs with time based upon the whims of perception, which is also moral relativism. If man's law is in harmony with natural law, then it is inherent, self-evident, and therefore redundant, and irrelevant to have such a law. If man's law is out of harmony with natural law, it is immoral and therefore should not be obeyed. Either way, man's law becomes irrelevant to have and only holds us back as a false religion from furthering our evolution and freedom as a species. All man's law are antithetical to a society's progression. It is thereby the means for violence to be wielded It is thereby the means for violence to be wildly acceptable as the social norms onto the people it claims to protect. Under these conditions, people are dulled to the truth of the overall grotesque condition of slavery, which they now love. They are perpetually seeking change in the realm of effects, failing to understand causality, which lies in the realm of consciousness. So what is the difference between force and violence? Force is the capacity to generate moral initiation of physical change. Actions that do not violate other sentient beings' natural rights. Actions which one always possesses the right to take, including self-defense. Actions that never result in the destruction of freedom, therefore is in harmony with natural law. Violence is the capacity to generate the immoral initiation of physical change. Or in other words, it really is the initiation of immoral physical change. The immoral initiation of harmful actions that are in opposition to other sentient beings' natural rights. Actions which one never possesses the right to take. Actions that always result in the destruction of freedom, therefore is in opposition to natural law. What is a right? Well, to understand objective morality, we must understand what a right is. And the best way to understand this is through the apophatic method, or apophatic deduction, which is about looking at the negative, looking at what a wrong is. So a wrong is not based in truth, aka incorrect. Immoral, actions that do harm or violate other sentient beings, thus not in harmony with natural law. A right is based in truth, aka correct. It is moral. Actions that do not harm or violate other sentient beings, thus is in harmony with natural law. A right is any expression of a sentient being that does not violate or harm another sentient being. That's what a right is. It is an action that does not cause harm. And by harm, I mean it does not violate the rights of other sentient beings. Another big portion about understanding natural law is understanding property rights and freedom and how they are interconnected. All rights are invariably property rights, which makes the understanding of what we rightfully own and do not own of critical importance. So what does it mean to own a thing? To own a thing means that regarding that thing, an individual maintains rightful possession. Now remember here, rightful means moral in this context, under objective morality and natural law. So it cannot have been stolen or wrongfully acquired or have any kind of wrongful possession of it. You control its usage. You are the one who is in control of its usage, just like your body. Your consciousness is in control of the body's usage, even at the cellular level. So responsibility is the next thing. So these are the three main things that you have to have have rightful ownership. So you have to have rightful possession, meaning there can be no violence connected to the way that the possession came about. You have to control the usage, meaning that you are the one who maintains it, takes responsibility for it, and uses it. In few words, the reason why humanity is continually experiencing a systematic and constant growing loss of freedom is because we collectively do not understand ownership, and we continue to commit and condone theft. Nobody owns my property. My body is my property. You do not own my body. You do not own my consciousness. You do not own my emotions. You do not own my actions. I own these things. You do not own my spirit. And this goes for all beings. Nobody legitimately owns another being. This is what is coined as the natural law of freedom. There is a law to freedom, and there are requirements for freedom to manifest. Those requirements is that we live in harmony with natural law. Freedom and morality are directly proportional to each other. So as the aggregate of humanity increases in morality, freedom increases. As the aggregate of humanity decreases in morality, freedom decreases. So the presence of truth and morality in the aggregate of humanity or society is inversely proportional to the presence of tyranny and slavery in manifestation or society. So go back to the natural law earlier on, what I was just talking about. As more actions build up in the condition of humanity that destroy other people's freedoms, meaning as more immoral actions are put into manifestation, there is less freedom in manifestation. Vice versa, as more actions are put in that are moral and less that are immoral, then there is more freedom in manifestation. Because all immoral actions destroy freedom. That's what immorality is. It is the destruction of freedom. The rejection of freedom. True freedom can never exist in a society that enshrines moral relativism. Unfortunately, this is the most widely accepted dogma in the world. Moral relativism. So what is moral relativism? Moral relativism is the idea that morality is subjective or based upon the arbitrary whims of an individual's perception, and that there is no inherent and objective difference between right and wrong behavior. First of all, I would like to say that anybody who says that truth or morality is subjective, they are starting out with the presupposition of objectiveness, meaning that they are stating objectively that it is subjective, which counteracts their entire statement and destroys it, meaning that they do have some form of presuppositional objectivity to these concepts, which they fail to recognize because most people don't go to the underlying cause or dig into the presuppositions very much. But it destroys the entire argument, coming back to, oh, well, then it is objective, you know? So Satan says, moral relativism keeps me in business. Thumbs up, motherfucker. We got it going on. Keep the immorality running amok in society, and slavery will be the result. Most punks do not want true freedom because what they want is the lack of responsibility. They absolutely abhor responsibility and will do anything to avoid it and attribute it to something external. And I think this is a really good image of a man-child being fed by his mother or sister or girlfriend or whoever it might be. Pretty much being spoon-fed, finger-fed this shitty, toxic food because this person can't take care of himself, because this person acts like he can't take care of himself. A man-child, a grown man with a bib on. This is what the punk community looks like. This is the epitome of a pseudo-punk, and I've seen things very similar to this actually happen. True freedom assumes full responsibility, ladies and gentlemen. Get over it and get with it. Fake-ass punks think anarchy means chaos. This is one of the most common things that I've come personally in contact with since my farm is called 88 Acres of Anarchy, which unfortunately we are not in a condition of anarchy because we are in a condition of slavery. But one of the main things that I've seen is that a lot of people in the punk and rebellious community are really attracted to the idea that anarchy means chaos. They love it because it means that they can go out and do whatever they want without thinking that there's consequences, and trying to avoid and abdicate their personal responsibility for those consequences. The vast majority of punks erroneously think anarchy means chaos and thus have been duped into believing that freedom is chaos. They erroneously think that freedom means you can do whatever you want, which is completely antithetical to freedom. You can do whatever you want up to the point which you are violating natural law, meaning up to the point that you are violating other people's freedom. It's not just about your freedom. True freedom has to do with other people. We're talking about a collective freedom. We're not just talking about my freedom. There's no such thing as just my freedom. It's our freedom. Get that through your head. Anarchy is not chaos. Slavery is chaos. So the definition of anarchy comes from the Greek prefix an, which means without or the absence of, and the Greek noun archon, which means master or ruler. Anarchy does not mean without rules. It literally means without masters or rulers. No rulers, no masters, no slaves, or in other words, freedom. The spiritual anarchist is a self-awakened being who knows that there can never be any legitimacy to authority and government because those are simply euphemisms for violence and slavery, which are always immoral and in opposition to the universal laws or natural laws that govern the dynamics of the consequences of human behavior. Anarchism is not chaos. And the false belief, these are some false beliefs about anarchism over here on the right. You have anarchism equals chaos, anarchism equals terrorism, anarchism equals disorder, etc. By definition, anarchism is the philosophy of freedom. Because philosophy means love, philos, and Sophia is wisdom. So this can be broken down into the love of wisdom and freedom, or the love for wisdom in freedom. Anarchism is not chaos, terrorism, or disorder. I see that the overwhelming vast majority of anarchists do not understand what it means to be a true anarchist. There are many different flavors of anarchism, but just because somebody may claim to be an anarchist does not make it true. Anarchism has nothing to do with violence, chaos, terrorism, disorder, theft, vandalism, riots, pseudo-revolutions, or any actions that destroy or harm other people's freedoms. Whether it be through communism, socialism, fatalism, fascism, Marxism, capitalism, solipsism, if it instigates or advocates actions that are in opposition to objective truth, morality, natural law, rights, then it is antithetical or contradictory to true anarchism. And yes, there is such a thing as true anarchism. Anarchism cannot be any forms of the claim of ownership of another being's mind, property, body, and product of labor, or any aspects of their rightful expressions as beings of nature. Anarchism without adjectives, but with the one condition of the law of non-contradiction. There's a lot of hypocrites and contradictory ideologies running in the pseudo-anarchist punk community. Even if the absence of government really did mean anarchy in a negative, disorderly sense, which is far from being the case, even then, no anarchical disorder could be worse than the position to which government has led humanity. Leo Tolstoy, a Russian anarchist. Fake-ass punks, also known as scenesters. So we see on the right here these two contrasts of different styles of punk. There's all kinds of different styles of punk, genres and aesthetics. This is not punk, and neither is this. Neither of these define punk. Punk has nothing to do with how you look or with your clothes. Doesn't matter about what makeup you have on, what brand of shoes you're wearing. And honestly, I'm going to go as far as it doesn't matter what kind of music you're listening to. It's well beyond that. Punk fashion is the clothing, hairstyle, cosmetics, jewelry, and body modifications of some type. The fashion of punk whispers to represent going against the cultural norm, a form of anti-cultural symbolic representation. For a time, it definitely did make that statement, but over time, just like most anti-cultural ideologies, it has been assimilated by the culture which they are in opposition against, because they did not understand these fundamental principles. Fashion is not the defining characteristic of punk, though it can be a component of it, and complement it for means of making a statement against the norm. But being a punk is also to not fall into conformity. The truth is, punks have become eagerly identified with the aesthetic values instead of the philosophical values. This has led to many people playing dress-up rather than being a true rebel. Starting from aesthetics rather than that of philosophy leads to a lot of unnecessary work that most will never do. It is far more important to start with philosophy and build your aesthetics from that. So what I mean by philosophy here is pretty much principles and the understanding of objective morality. But you can go even farther into that and get into some real deep metaphysical concepts as well that you can build your universal views from and build your aesthetic values off of those universal views. But the whole point here is that, the main thing that we see is that fashion has become the defining characteristic of punk when it actually is not. And this has nothing to do with rebellion anymore. At one point it was about rebellion. It was about making, kind of like a Discordian ideology. Everybody had to dress a certain way. They had a certain type of dress code or traditionary wares that you had to, put on and sport, throughout society. And if you went against that, then you would be frowned against. And I understand why this came about, and I think that it can be used properly. This kind of attitude can be used to make a statement, but what it has become is different than what it can be used for. What it is being used for now is just this mall punk attitude. Go to PacSun and get your new punk jeans that have been ripped up, etc. And, it's more so that the females fall into this, unfortunately. But the men are falling for it almost just as much. What they really are is hipsters in costumes. While the masses are being farmed and pushed towards permanent enslavement, fake-ass punks sit back in a drug-induced, deadened state of consciousness, only concerned with themselves and how they look, and think it is rebellion. The vast majority of punks have come to love their servitude as long as it benefits them in some fashion. Puns right there. Holding the notion of going along to getting along or going with the flow. They prefer the neatness of chained comfort rather than the raw, unchained uniqueness of individuality. So what's a scenester? That's a person who tries very hard to fit in with a stereotypical type of scene, often having to do with a specific genre of music, dresses, and acts in prescribed fashion and image focused. So they're focused on their image. And I thought it was interesting that a doodle and a dandy means the same thing. Like the old Yankee Doodle Dandy. So doodle is make a fool of, or a flop, a flap, and a man who is concerned with his clothes, appearance, and affected an excessive way, a dandy. A man unduly devoted to style, neatness, and fashion in dress and appearance. And I think this is a great example of the emasculated punk, or the mall punk, or hipster in costumes that have floated to the light of mind control like a moth to the flame. I see fake ass punks everywhere. And when I go to shows, it's like sitting in this compartment on the right hand side, sitting with a bunch of mannequins, unfortunately. Fake ass punks have an image to maintain. Real punks just don't give a fuck. So why do we continuously see this style as the defining hallmark of a punk? Why do we see these styles here? The spikes, the type of, neck chokers and spike necklaces and makeup and crazy hairdos, the mohawks. What is all this about? Why has this arisen in the punk culture? Obviously, we can just say, oh, well, it's about rebellion and looking brutal and, looking like you're ready to fight and stuff. But I think that's the whole problem here, is that everybody just wants to look the part. So maybe it's a little bit more than just looking the part, right? My assertion is that it is rooted in ancient traditions, one of which is the shamanic spiritual warrior, and it is a declaration of being battle ready to defend freedom. A shaman is a way shower, or one who can see in the dark. Spiritual warriorship is more than just a metaphor that you drag out every time you're challenged to take action necessary to change. Our attitudes and behaviors of self-denial are challenging to change precisely because they have become hardwired habits of thoughts, feelings, and memories. It is the internal realm of these habits that is perpetuated, that is the perpetual battleground of the spiritual warrior. As such, he seeks to confront the enemy from within. Our everyday actions in the outer world are a direct reflection of our actions in the inner world. Without inner change, we cannot have outer change. The shaman spiritual warriors are prepped for the unexpected. They are not afraid of their own shadow. They are not afraid of losing popularity when speaking truth. The path of the shaman spiritual warrior is not soft and sweet. It is not blissful and pretend forgiving. It is not fearful of divisiveness and divisiveness. It is the middle path which embraces true balance of the all. So we obviously know that the Mohawks come from the Mohicans, or the Native American tribes, and that's where we get the word Mohawk comes from. Mohican, and it is definitely a powerful symbol, and I believe it should be utilized. I believe all these things should be utilized, but we've lost the honor that these original traditions would teach people. So, people just they get these. They're getting their feathers for their headdress far too soon without actually proving and earning it in nature. And what I mean by that, you have infinite value, but what I mean is that you have to earn the things that you gain. You have to work for those things. You have infinite worth here, obviously, so I don't mean that you don't have worth unless you work for it. The attainment, adaptation, and use of spirit animals, zootypes, or totemic animals, usually a bear or a wolf, was often occurring within a context of a certain formal initiation rites and rituals for the shamans. Like martial arts, we adapted the ways of nature to our own style. Our own armors and weapons are no different. There is also a component of theatrics which can be used as a form of psychological manipulation through fear and other emotions. Today's spikes and studs are adapted from nature's kingdom. They are the horns, fangs, claws, shells, and many other components of the animals and reptiles and plant kingdom. This type of aesthetics can be used both for the uplift of consciousness or the degrading of consciousness. Unfortunately, most only use this style for looks rather than a self-defensive function or practical use, or a declaration of being a battle-ready, shamanic spiritual warrior. We should take heed to the ancient ways, for our path has been led astray. True punks should train themselves physically, mentally, and spiritually, for they are in the battle every day. And I think these images on the right give pretty decent examples of what I'm saying here. You see the totemic animals and the shaman, spiritual warrior walking the path. And then Batman is a great example of the psychological, theatrical approach to this style, So there is practical use for the way punks dress, but most punks are going to their local mall and buying studs instead of actually making real studs that are practically usable, because they really don't take this war seriously. They don't really understand that they're in a spiritual war, and that it has been reflected physically. And they're living in this false notion of bliss during such times of iniquities and inequities. The basic difference between an ordinary person and a warrior is that a warrior takes everything as a challenge, and an ordinary person takes everything either as a blessing or a curse. Carlos Castaneda. And I feel that this quote is very accurate for what I'm talking about here. So true warriors will face the evil that most will never face. Man, the living creature, the creating individual, is always more important than any established style or system. Bruce Lee. Now, do not become egoly attached to your style. Be like water, because you are water. It is a part of you. You are mostly water. And you need to be the flow, ever adaptable to your environment. The unspoken within the herd. There are those who know this truth but continue to remain silent about this issue based out of fear and lack of the sacred masculine principle of consciousness, which is action. They would rather accept the horrific default condition in order to keep their comfortable state of feeling good than that of speaking up in hope to try and inspire change. It's not the screams of my enemies that keep me up late in the night, but the long silence of my friends, for in the end we will not remember the words of our enemies, but the absence of the words of our fellow brothers and sisters of our planet who sat back and did nothing. Those who keep their lips zipped for fear of introducing controversy ensure things remain the same. Fear of being ostracized is conformity, and it is not very punk of you. You self-censoring bastard. The world will not be destroyed by those who do evil, but by those who watch them without doing anything. Albert Einstein. Remember, dead fish float downstream, but it takes a live one to swim upstream. It takes the rebel to make great change when all have become stagnant. You have to be the way. You have to be the change that you want to see in this world. There is no escape from it. While most people are still trying to run from the iniquities going on within our society, true punks or true rebels will stand and face it with courage and perseverance. They will not back down. A true rebel's final words will be, "Bury me in the ocean with my ancestors who jumped from the ships, because they knew death was better than bondage. I would rather die on my feet a free man than ever kneel before any forms of authority as a slave." Nowadays. So totalitarian hippies, or the hypocrites, are those who once claimed that they wanted freedom, truth, and love, but over time returned back to the matrix of control, abandoning the path of enlightenment for a more mundane life of obedience and servitude. I liken this to your friend's father who comes to you and says, "I used to be against the system and or authority until blank changed me or my attitude." Once you, quote unquote, grow up, you will understand what I'm saying, which is nothing more but a cowardly justification to escape reality that there is no legitimacy to authority. The social engineered totalitarian hippie promotes a communist and Marxist ideology, which ultimately is one of the very notions that ensures more slavery for humanity. And you got the guy on the right over here, in the past, promoting the peace shirt, question authority. It shouldn't even say question authority. It should say all authority is illegitimate. All man's authority. But now you have the guy as an older man who has a shirt with Obama on it instead of a peace sign. Obama's logo on it instead of a peace sign. And it says, "Question anyone questioning authority." And he's bringing a subpoena to you, supporting authority. Hypocrites. Absolute trash. Garbage. There are only two mistakes on the path to truth. One is not starting, the other is not going all the way. These are people that have not gone all the way. They are pitching their tent. And even more so, they are like Cypher in the movie The Matrix, who sells out his friends to the agent Smith, to the machine control system, the Matrix. If you're not a fully awakened being, then you are still part of that system. So somebody might ask, why am I bringing up the hippies in a punk presentation? Well, it's actually a very simple answer. Fundamentally, they are related. If you look at the evolution of the ideology, we can take a look at music for this example. Punk was rooted in proto-punk, which was rooted in the psychedelic music or psychedelic movement, which is also rooted in beat poets. And you can follow this, linear path of these genres and watch how they evolve, which is pretty interesting, to say the least. But you can also see where they're co-opted and corrupted. Like I said, I'm not going to get into that, but if you guys want to know more about that, I would highly recommend looking into people like Mark Devlin for that line of inquiry. And I will go ahead and add in as well here that in my sequel to this presentation, I will be touching on topics such as that in more depth. So you could also look out for that as well. I will be going over the music side of this and the co-opting and more about the dark occult rather than just the psychology of this. Garbage Pal Punks. Now, I personally have dealt with a lot of these people. I'm not going to give any kind of anecdotal here, but, having a compound like Skatopia, I run into quite a variety of different types of punks. That is also why I do feel that I am qualified to speak on these topics because of the lifestyle that I've lived. And for information about that, you're welcome to check out skatopia.com or just to search for Skatopia. Garbage Pal Punks. Junkie Jeffrey. And the Split Kid. Garbage Pal Punks are also known as crusties, gutter punks, and hobo punks. And make sure you understand I'm talking about fake ass punks. I'm talking about pseudo punks. They are generally considered to be separate, but in reality they all share a common thread of an egocentric worldview. Only concerned with themselves, and their main goal in life is simply to survive. They believe in the illusion that there is no possibility for change to occur, thus they do not attempt to make things better. I liken these people to a parasite. They come and blend in and attach in with the group to suck from it what they desire. They live life as bottom feeders, but it is not because they cannot or have no way of taking care of themselves. They manipulate people by way of proxy as the homeless or incapacitated. A main driving factor for them is addiction. They will do anything for a taste of what they are addicted to, even if it means more slavery and suffering. They are perpetually in the me thinking, and survival always is more important than doing what is morally right. The dark occult want people to be in this exact mindset because, contrary to what most people think, they are far easier to control from this position than that of a position of intelligence. The Split Kid is a great or a metaphor for what I'm talking about here. These kids are in polarized dialectic, left brain, right brain, but most of these ones, like what we're talking about here, are right brain, falling into the addiction and hedonism spectrum. You find that they're willing to pretty much do anything for the substances that they're addicted to. Now, the image on the right-hand side I'm showing here is of some punks partaking in some kind of smokable substance. I've seen a lot of punks, sitting there panhandling while they are, smoking crack that they bought last night, while they're asking for change for beer, for their next 12-pack. They're not actually putting their mind or their actions into anything very productive. They're not taking care of themselves, though they are capable of doing so. And, by golly, that you ask these people to actually help you out, to do something, they won't even do anything for the change. They just want you to give it to them. They want everything without actually earning it. And I've ran into so many of these people at my compound. The female at the bottom having a Pabst Blue Ribbon case of beer over top of the crown chakra, like it is her master or her ruler. I have seen so many people, and I'm sure everybody knows, just they're so obsessed with being shithead alcoholics. I'm not saying don't drink. I drink every once in a while. But there is a point where the abuse of those substances end up causing consequences, especially in the amplification of slavery and suffering around them and within them. Punks. Fake-ass punks everywhere. They want to smash the state and reclaim freedom, but all they do is beg, smell bad, and drink beer. SJWs in the punk movement. Yes, there are SJWs in the punk movement. Punk itself has kind of opened the doorway for a lot of these things to come into manifestation, actually. Because of that co-opting I was talking about a little bit earlier, of the ideology, right? I've actually come across punks who want to censor people, you know? And it's like, whoa, where the fuck did that come from? I thought punks were rebels who were about standing up for freedom, not about trying to censor other people. I didn't think that punks got offended so easily. I thought punks were not so emotionally touchy. Isn't that the point of being a punk? Is to not care what other people think about you and you to do your own thing without violating other people? You know, because you're doing no harm and you just want to be left alone. You want to do your own shit. Oh, but no, that's not what it's turned out to be. Now it's about a scene or an image. You know, it's about hanging out and making friends. And I'm not dogging on making friends, but, you know, that's what it has become. And now we have the SJWs that are in the groups. These socially engineered idiots. Stupid jackass whiners. You know, demanding that the rights of others are oppressive. So they want them restricted. Like the guy is saying in the image above. Obey me. Screaming at the top of his lungs. Our feelings are hurt. The group of the people in the background with the picket sign saying our feelings are hurt. You have big business and big government and the military complex gladly saying our pleasure. You know, we will do this to you. This is what we want. We want you to be out there doing these things. This is part of the social engineer agenda to divide and conquer the people. And this isn't even showing the hidden hand that controls all three of those elite organizations. You know, then we have the feminazis, right? The unholy feminine. And I'm all about equal rights. I'm all about classical feminism. Okay? So don't take me the wrong way here. But neo-feminism has nothing to do with equal rights. It's about demonizing the masculine principle and the masculine gender. You know? But they're being socially engineered for this as well. Not realizing that there's a epi-eugenics agenda backing it to control their minds so that they don't understand how important it is to breed in good genes into the population, to find people who will rebel, strong men who will stand in the face of tyranny and say no and stand up and protect their children. No, they want men who will cater to them. They want people who, you know, will take care of them through money and monetary means, by supporting slavery, you know. A funny thing is that a lot of these SJWs are just keyboard commandos. You know, they act tough behind a keyboard online, and that's it. You know, the way that I present myself here is the way that I talk everywhere. You know, I mean, I act off the non-aggression principle. I actually might be a little bit more assertive on here, but I'm actually really calm. I'm an extremely level-headed individual, you know, and I'm not going to aggress upon anybody else as long as they're not aggressing upon me. You know, do no harm, take no shit. To give a little antidotal to this bottom left meme here, I was booking bands for my event that I have here at Skatopia annually each year. And I ran into some of these transgender SJW individuals in a band. And the lead singer happened to have posted something on their page that I thought was quite funny, which was they were trying to petition to get derogatory terms removed from porno sites about transgenderism. And I thought it was a joke, honestly, so I laughed at it. I honestly thought it was a joke because it was coming from a punk individual, so I assumed wrongly that this individual would be, for free speech and for freedom of expression, considering that that's what they're asking for, correct? They want freedom of speech and want freedom of expression, and not to be aggressed upon. But I thought it was funny because the whole nature and essence of porno is derogatory itself. The underlying essence of porno is derogatory. That's their entire business. So it's like asking water to not be wet. It's absolutely absurd and gets us nowhere. Just a completely powerless individual who has no idea they've probably been duped into some social engineered agenda, and to make it very clear, I am not against any kind of consensual sex or choice about gender. If you want to identify as a man or a female, I don't really give a shit. I do care about whether you are brainwashing children into that instead of waiting until they are of the age that they're capable of making that decision on their own, like maybe you did. Of course, I'm not talking about ostracizing or ridiculing them or anything before that age. No bullying, of course. Bullying is about abuse and domination, and it's about authority. It's about suffering. So I'm just making it clear that I'm not against people of different sexual choice, just like I'm not against people of different color or different preference in their religious beliefs, as long as their religious beliefs are doing no harm, But I think that's kind of some of the problem here, is that there is harm being done. So this individual, to get back to the story, this individual messaged me privately and asked me why I laughed at their post, and I explained why very peacefully. I explained why very peacefully, and she responded with such animosity, I was astounded. And, by the end of the conversation, to say the least, I was called a white privileged man, right? Leading into this bottom left-hand slide here. Judging people by their race and sex is wrong. I wish you privileged white men would get that, as they're judging by race and sex. So it's kind of hypocritical, and it just shows how far they are in cognitive dissonance. And I just felt so bad that this individual was so broken at that level. And it seems that there's more of them in the punk movement than a lot of us would like to admit to. And I would wholeheartedly say that that is part of an agenda. And it goes all the way back to the hippie agenda and the hippie movement and MK Ultra and Project Monarch and Paperclip. So, there's just a lot to this, but I think I've taken enough time on this one. Freedom of speech is more important than your feelings. Get as offended about that one as you like as well. If you are offended by any word in any language, it is probably because your parents were unfit to raise a child. Doug Stanhope, an amazing comedian. Antifa and their fake rebellion. The so-called Antifa movement is an opposition to the Nazi Party, which is Balkanization, controlled opposition, divide and conquer tactic to bring in a pre-planned, expanded police state. Though these individuals might not think so, that is what the movement is about, just like most of these other movements. What do I mean by balkanization? Well, obviously this is a term about divide and conquer. You know, breaking things into finer components so that they start to battle with each other. Whether by paid provocateurs or just unconscious ignorance, this movement has no power to create real change because of the lack of understanding and the application of objective morality. Though they may claim to be anarchists, it is far more accurate to call the mass majority of them fascists. All you have to do is look at the results, and one can readily recognize that it will get us nowhere in our task to end slavery. What people think we need for a revolution is Molotov cocktails. What we really need for a revolution is education. Education into the occult. The not-so-new Nazis. This is people who do not see. It's a puns, play on the word. It's green language. Those who are Nazis cannot see. But in the punk movement, we have a lot of neo-Nazis. They think they're punks, but they're not. Neo-Nazi punks, aka neo-Nazism, consist of a post-World War II militant, social, or political movement seeking to revive and implement the ideology of Nazism. Neo-Nazis seek to employ their ideology to promote hatred and violence towards those who do not espouse the same ideology, or in some cases to create a fascist political state. Actually, I would say in most cases. It borrows elements from the Nazi doctrine, including ultranationalism, racism, xenophobia, homophobia, and anti-Semitism. In other words, they are just part of another branch of the cult belief and authority vested in man. Though they claim to be punks, aka supporters of freedom, they are, in truth, just another antithesis of punk ideology who put on the costume and think that it makes them punk. Neo-Nazis are not true punk. They are in fact completely antithetical to being a true punk. You are not a punk. Stop claiming that you are. It's insane to say this, but these people would have to completely ignore the history of the punk genre, right? Because the African Americans pioneered the way for punk to come into being. You know, they were the pioneers for it. And I mean, look at bands like Bad Religion, right? Come on. Get with it, people. And if you don't realize that these ideologies that I'm speaking about here today are on the rise, then you're out of your goddamn mind. The Brave New World. Hypnopedic Conditioning. The Brave New World is a book by Aldous Huxley, and if you haven't read it, I highly suggest that you do. I was lucky enough to have a rebellious father who raised me, and he was a strong, father, a very spiritually strong person who was well on his way to understanding some deep occult knowledge before he was in an accident. He's doing much better now, but I'll just leave it at that. He had a head accident. He had a traumatic brain injury. He had a tire explode in his face. Crazy accident, but that's all I'll get into with that. But the point is that when I was younger, he gave me 3 books to read before I was 12. All 3 of these. One was The Hobbit, and I loved that book. It's a great allegory. And he, I kept not wanting to read that book, but he was like, "You got to read this book. Read this book." So the other one was 1984, and I devoured that book, and I've devoured it multiple times, which is by George Orwell. And actually it was 4 books. The other book was Animal Farm, which I read before The Hobbit. That was the first one I had read, which is by Orwell. And then A Brave New World, which is the one I read last. But I did read it. I think I finished it when I was, in my late 12th year, closing in on my 13th year. So, I had a rebellious father who was trying to initiate me into the understanding of this knowledge very early on. Just to give you an idea of some of that background as well, when I was a child, he would read me The Satanic Witch. He would read me The Satanic Bible by Anton LaVey. He, read me multiple Founding Father documents. I was very astute with the Founding Fathers and, very astute with understanding natural rights. And it was only when I came into contact with Mark Passio's work, which you can see a lot of influence in my presentation style, and even a lot of the information in this presentation has come from him, so I can't take credit for a lot of this stuff. A lot of it has come from him and other great researchers, and not trying to take any credit for some of this information provided. But yeah, if you'd like to check out Mark Passio, go to whatonearthishappening.com. I highly recommend checking his work out. He has a plethora of knowledge, and I would start at podcast 1 on his website and just work your way chronologically through them. But my whole point is that I was initiated very early on. I was an awakened being, a spiritually trained warrior at a young age. And I've been in this fight for a long time, and I will be in this fight forever. My oath is to freedom, and my mission is here on this planet. Spirit in the flesh. I'm coming back here every time until freedom has been manifested. Over and over and over. That's my oath. But to get back to the presentation here, Huxley's Brave New World, which was in 1932 it came out, is about a dystopian society that is not controlled by fear, but rendered docile by false happiness. The mantra of the society is everybody's happy now, so slavery is just fine. As such, to achieve this goal, the Society of a Brave New World combines 2 central modes of control. First, the widespread use of pleasure-inducing pharmaceuticals, known as soma, and the second, a hypnotic media propaganda machine that works less on reason than it does through emotions. In other words, an emotional mind control machine. Kind of like government, well, actually religion. Kind of like religion, huh? Sounds like religion. This is about a right brain society, whereas like 1984 would be more of a left brain society ruled by the fist. Now we're seeing both of these implemented today. It's not just one or the other. But in the punk community, this seems to be one of the main targets towards these individuals because of their susceptibility to, self-loathing and narcissism and atheism and hedonism, especially hedonism, just me. As long as I'm happy, it does not matter, as long as I'm feeling good, as long as I'm getting to see these bands and going out to shows, everything's fine. Slavery's just fine. Who cares about slavery, I can get my freaking mocha coffee at Starbucks, right? The main thing is induce a self-hypnopedic conditioning by repetitively doing these substances over and over and over, and then propagandizing themselves with the forms of media that they listen to. Most people don't even listen to the lyrics anymore. I personally like lyrics, in music. I like to hear and know what they're saying. I like bands that freaking push a message, But in the punk community now, and in the metal community and the hardcore community, it doesn't seem like that is at all taken into account when it comes to music. People just want to feel good. I can get behind a band that is pushing a good message, even if I don't like the music that's being played by the instruments. If it has a good message, then I will promote that, and I will even listen to it. I might not drown myself in it constantly, which is not a good idea, because that's a form of emotional blockage as well. There can be an abuse to that as well, to escape from reality. But, I think my point here is that I can, or listen to music that is pushing a message about freedom, and like that very much, even though I don't like the instruments, being played, or the music being played. But Aldous Huxley says, a really efficient totalitarian state would be one in which the all-powerful executive political bosses and their army managers control a population of slaves who do not have to be coerced because they love their servitude. And how do they get to this state? Well, by introducing their happy drug, soma, right? Whatever it might be, their pharmaceuticals, we are rampant in a pharmaceutical war. It is absolutely absurd, which is leading me into my next slide. So the term A Brave New World is actually coming from Shakespearean writing. I believe it comes from The Tempest, Act 9, Scene 1. And that is where Huxley got the idea from, is from reading Shakespeare's take on a perfect world, or a utopia, and combining it with, the state of the world to come. So this is a world where people think they are always happy. This is American History RX, or Generation RX, which is actually a documentary I highly recommend to watch about this subject that we are discussing. And this is running rampant in the punk community. Heavy substance abuse, heavy pharmaceutical abuse. Fake-ass rebels worship money as their god. Now, if we think about the movie SLC Punk, which if you haven't seen, you should watch, that's what this image on the screen is from. This is Steve-O, the main protagonist of SLC Punk. And then he has a friend, Heroin Bob, who dies in the movie. And they both were, punks, anarchists in this movie. Though I don't agree with a lot of what they were doing. There was a lot of pseudo-punk things going on. A lot of the things that I'm talking about in this presentation, I feel it's a great movie to give you the overtone of a lot of fake-ass punk shit and fake-ass rebellious shit. But he ends up selling out and becoming, I think, a lawyer at the end. And he's saying at the end, I was nothing more than a goddamn trendy-ass poser. Well, got to respect him. He's telling the truth. Because he wasn't fundamentally sound with his principles and straight as an arrow. He became a statist, just like Cypher in the Matrix, like I was talking about earlier, He sold out. A sellout is one who abandons one's principles, values, lifestyle, friends, and or a change in music towards a more popular and more profitable mainstream style. A radio-friendly style in exchange for wealth, status, or power. Mostly motivated by the desire for money. The mon-I, the one I, the proxy for true spiritual currency. And money is a belief-based system of control based upon the fear of scarcity, which is purposely being used to limit the access to energy. Okay? And that includes your energy. But this is what they think about the most, is money. I know so many punks that's all they're concerned with. Well, fake ass punks. Money, money, money. This piece of fucking garbage. A fucking promissory note. Gotta be shitting me. This is a punk presentation, and I'm going to be raw. I'm going to talk to you like I talk to everybody. I mean, there's zombies. Zombies, just like this Walking Dead creature on the screen. Just pay me, and I'll do what you want. Completely mind controlled. True rebels never sell out. If you love wealth greater than liberty, the tranquility of servitude greater than the animating contest for freedom, go home from us in peace. We seek not your counsel nor your arms. Crouch down and lick the hand that feeds you. May your chains set lightly upon you, and may posterity forget that you were our countrymen. Samuel Adams, a true rebel and a true punk. This man was a true punk and a true rebel. So these are 4 general justifications for why punks don't stand up for freedom. These are answers that I've actually received from people when I ask them what are they doing to help end slavery, what are their proactive solutions that they are implementing, what are they doing to contribute towards creation. One is everything is just fine to me. That is one response I get. Another is, as long as I can do what I want and get what I want, who cares? I can never make a change. It's always going to be like this, so why try? My pleasure and happiness comes before true freedom. Yes, I've heard somebody say that my pleasure and happiness comes before freedom. Those words left their mouth. My pleasure and happiness comes before freedom. So the whole motto of the fake ass punks is to get fucked up and do fucked up shit, and to do it without taking responsibility for the consequences, and to completely ignore what that fucked up shit leads to, the consequences of their behavior. And you know what they are? Nothing but a bunch of cowards. This is all cowardliness. That's all this is. No courage, no bravery, no honor. Where's your damn integrity? Not very punk of you to be cowards. Epigenetics. What is epigenetics? Epigenetics is a science that we are not controlled by genes like computer programs are controlled by code. This is a Darwinian-based fallacy propagated by scientism. Modern science has been proving that genes are biological tendencies for expressions. Changing our consciousness can influence or even change completely the tendency for expressions within our genome code. Vibration has a profound effect on our continual evolving genetic code. When we apply this knowledge and change our consciousness, our code can actually be rewritten and a different manifestation can be expressed. We are not just the code. We are the writers of the code. Our consciousness is the writers of the code, and this has been scientifically proven. Not from scientism, which is about religion, faith in that all science is correct all the time, But this is about rewriting ourselves, taking control back of ourselves, You need to breed good genes, and one way to do that, to breed good genes is by enhancing your consciousness to create better tendencies for the genetic expressions. The better the frequency, the more amplified the frequency and more stable it is, the better the manifesting result will be. For study into this area, I would suggest Greg Braden and also primarily Bruce Lipton, who both are revolutionizing our understanding about epigenetics. Epidysgenics agenda: downbreeding for maintainable slavery. This is the propagation of dysgenics by way of social engineering, or we could just say population control through mind control. This is done for the purpose of creating people with horrible traits and characteristics through the manipulation of the human biology and through way of consciousness. Usually done by way of chemicals in our food, water, and air to disrupt the endocrine system and, to disrupt the mind, the psychology of the being, to throw the vibration out of sync with the body so that more negative genetic expressions start to manifest. And this is being targeted at our children. I'm not a big guy who thinks IQ tests are very accurate, but look at the drop in the IQ. It's absolutely absurd. The average IQ has dropped so quickly. And I believe that that is because of agendas like this, or this one directly. That's coming from, these big think tanks, institutions like the Club of Rome, or the Tavistock Institution, or the CFR. You need to do your homework and look into these people. Breeding out the rebels. The epidysgenics agenda is designed to breed in willing slaves and eliminate resistant rebels, independent thinkers, and spiritually awakened beings. Individuals with high reverence for rebellion against the state, for true freedom, who places the highest value on personal responsibility and natural law, are traits that are being targeted and deliberately filtered out of society. By influencing the mass majority of females to be attracted only to specific characteristics in men who just happen to be the most fitting to perpetuate the system of human slavery. This tactic is being directly used to weaken and destroy target populations instead of improving, meaning that you could use eugenics to improve target populations. But instead we're using it to do this shit and breed out people who would rebel against tyranny. Psychopathology and the end of individuality. What does the word psychopathology mean? Well, most of us probably have a vague understanding of it. Psycho is from the Greek psycho or psyche. In turn is derived from the Latin psyche or psyche, which means animating spirit, the soul, mind, consciousness, breath, life, one's life, the invisible animating principle, or entity which occupies and directs the physical body, which we can just say is the spirit or soul, or the causality, the mind. And, we have the word pathologia, which is Latin, which means the study of disease. And this is from the Greek pathos, which means suffering. So we can see this is relating to the sickness of the mind, and it can be spiritual and mental illness. So this is not to exclude the understanding that mental illness is spiritual illness. The Greeks and the ancients understood this. We have long forgotten about this, though. So what do I mean about the end of individuality? Well, I mean pretty much the death of the true self, the divine self. You know, when I speak of individuality, I speak of it in terms of, uh, co-creation and cooperation with the other individuals amongst the species. So it's not just a selfish idea. So a lot of people take individuality to just be focused on the self alone, and that's not what it actually means. And then there's the other extreme as well, which is taking things into groupthink, right? And ultimately that is the end of individuality, is conformity and groupthink and herds and crowds. A great book on this is The Crowd by Gustave Le Bon, and I would highly recommend that as a read to understand how groupthink works. The consequences of the death of individuality must be seriously contemplated, for it must be true that a man or woman who has murdered their own individuality cannot hope to respect the individuality of those he meets. When you enter into their life, they see you as a thing rather than a person. They see a thing without feelings, which are all just projections of their own inner void and lack of, the way that they see themselves. They are incapable of dealing with men and women as thinking, feeling beings because they are rooted in a deep psychopathology, frozen like a mannequin. A human without being. Understand that last sentence. We are human beings. The human part is the physical. The being, now that is a metaphysical concept. That's spiritual. That's mental. But when you're in a psychopathological state, it's like you don't have a being. Nobody can prepare you for the rude awakening you experience when you see them for what they are. The blackness, the evil, lifeless soul, once exposed, can never be unseen or explained to one who hasn't seen it for themselves. And you can see this puppet pulling off his persona or mask to show his black hole eyes and his death gaze. And he's a puppet. He's not an individual, And he has convinced people that he is an individual by wearing the mask, playing the part, being part of the herd. But once they are revealed, once their mask is removed and their true being is unveiled, you never look at them the same again. They have to go through deep healing and atonement for what they have done and what they've become. And people like us are here to help them and help people like that if we are capable and if they are willing. Hedonism, i.e. the tyranny of passions, has no place in the well-ordered man or the well-ordered civilization. Hedonism is conformity and the death of individuality. Unfortunately, our elitist overlords have long been at dumbing us down to the level of beasts that cannot employ their natural, rational endowments, but only their carnal lust. The abolishment of free will by methodical conditioning. Servitude made acceptable by regular dose of chemically introduced happiness. As long as we are self-divided, we remain open to mass manipulation. We allowed this to happen to us because we mistakenly believed the lie they told us, namely that true liberty is the right to do whatever we want, whenever we want. True liberty is the essential property of objective truth and morality. Therefore, there can be no true liberty in a civilization that enshrines moral relativity. To depict this hedonism, I have chosen this image on the right, and I've seen multiple people use this image actually. I think it's a very good allegorical image for what I'm talking about. Many are afraid to heal because their entire identity is centered around the trauma they've experienced. They have no idea who they are outside of the trauma and the responses to the trauma, and that unknown is stifling to the mind and emotions. They would rather hold on to their self-perpetuated purgatory than to face their true self and make real change. Self-observation brings us to the realization of the necessity of self-change, and in this observing we notice that the act of observation itself is a step towards that self-change. Though it is not enough alone, it is the only place to start from. So what I mean by this is, I think people confuse a lot of times intuition with trauma. We can see this in dynamics between relationships with people all over the board. We need to understand the difference and figure out a very accurate way of discerning when traumas are surfacing compared to when the intuition is surfacing. And there is a definitive difference between the two. The trauma surfacing is from a pre-experience, and the mind has shoved that into the subconscious so that you can deal with the experience that has happened, so that you don't relive it over and over and over perpetually. So it puts it into the subconscious. But the problem with that is if you do not reconcile that trauma and heal from that trauma, if you just hide it in the closet, then eventually it will come back out. It will come out of the closet. It will surface again. And it happens constantly with a lot of people who have been immensely traumatized. So take a relationship between a male and female, for example, and let's say the female in the relationship has been parentally abused, and all of her relationships have been, just utterly shit and destroyed. People have cheated on her and beat her up and all this stuff. But yet she's with a guy who's, absolutely moral, in alignment with truth and love and freedom. Is not trying to control and is not acting out of fear and is not abusive. But yet this other person would still lash out in certain scenarios because of the trauma. So we have an example here. Maybe you're online or you're surfing the web or something and you happen to be reading a post from a female, right? And then it triggers her trauma of where she's been cheated on, and she thinks that it's an intuition that's telling her that you are cheating. This is what I'm talking about, where we cannot discern the difference between an actual intuition and just a trauma that is coming back up that has been undealt with, based out of fear. So this picture on the right here has an individual removing the mask or persona, and the triangle represents the spirit, the triune aspect of the mind and the self, thoughts, emotions, and actions. But in this image, the spirit is dead underneath that mask. And then in the guts, you have the vortex, symbolizing the vortex of hedonism, just pleasure, the endless pit. I mean, you can look at it different ways, but that's how I'm depicting this image here for this presentation, to give you an idea. So a lot of this trauma leads people into a collectivist mentality. As we race towards an ever more collectivist mindset, the true individual mindset is becoming obsolete and endangered. It has set into play a whole new standard for arrested development. The collectivist mindset is fervently recalcitrant to self-healing. It fears above all else doing the shadow work on the self. Individuality does not mean antisocial. It is the only thing that makes up the social in the group. You cannot have a group without the individual, but you can have an individual without a group. People are constantly trying to use you to help them create a particular illusion by which they live. This is particularly true of the collective illusion which sometimes are accepted as ideologies. You must renounce and sacrifice the approval that is only a bribe enlisted your support of a collective illusion. You must be willing, if necessary, to become a disturbing and therefore an undesired person, one who is not wanted because he upsets the general dream. Thomas Merton. We have these sheep up here, and you have the black sheep, which most people who are probably watching this presentation are relating with. Probably have been ostracized by their families or abandoned by friends, but the black sheep is responding to all these collectivist mindset. That's a utopian hippie. But who would build the roads? Freedom ain't free. Move to Somalia. Government is a necessary evil. These are all ridiculous. And, I covered some of this in my other presentation, an aggregated synthesis of occult knowledge, part 1, which is on my YouTube channel, and you can check that out. And it goes more into depth about natural law, rights, freedom, sovereignty. So I would, watch both of these presentations to really understand this. And then, like I said earlier, Mark Passio is the one that you really need to be going to. He can teach this stuff far better than most, and he has a plethora of knowledge out there. But the black sheep is saying, I think that all human interaction should be voluntary. And pretty much he's saying, I think that all human interaction should not be based on coercion or violence. But the collectivist group, they don't believe that. They want to coerce you. They want to use government to force you into their mindset through way of order followers, through way of the initiation of violence on you if you do not comply, whether it's moral or not. Groupthink leads to the attempt at abandoning or abdicating personal accountability and responsibility, and is the common factor in wrong decision-making or serious natural law breaches. This is due to the fact that the repetitive dogmatic idea of moral relativity is embedded in the long run in the wiring of our brains and the profound regions of our unconscious mind, from which the motives of our actions are forged. We have forgotten who is the author of ourselves, and we just start believing it was us. And what I mean by this is that we think that the ideas that have been given to us by the sorcerers of our time are our ideas alone, meaning that we think we are in control of those, when really they are giving us their mindset so that we act upon it. This is due to the horrific and astonishing power of ignorance and its effect on our consciousness. There is little to no reasoning in crowds, and they are quick to act without individual moral guidance under the false assumption of collectivism. How powerless they are to hold any opinions other than those which are imposed upon them by foreign minds. They are led, they are not the leaders, by seeking what produces an emotional impression on them and what seduces them. If one does not live up to an inner possibility, then this inner possibility becomes destructive. We often diagnose neurosis and psychotic disease as not lived higher possibilities. Refusal of higher development or higher consciousness is one of the most destructive things there is. Mary Louise von Franz. It's from her book Shadow and Evil and Fairy Tales, page 214. This is a great book. She is a great author, and she speaks about what we're talking about here, as you can see in this quote. The refusal of higher consciousness is one of the most destructive things there is. And that's what punks do. They want to live in base consciousness, in the lower 3 chakras, So they don't want to touch the Anuhata, the heart chakra, the Vishuddha, the throat chakra, the Ajna, the third eye chakra, or the crown chakra, which is Sahasrara. Like I said, living as the bottom feeders. And this is a groupthink thing. This is all about collectivism, and it has been interjected into the punk ideology, which is supposed to be antithetical to collectivism. It's supposed to be about individuality, you know? Everything else after natural law is unique individuality. So one of the most important parts to understand about psychopathology is the abuse victim cycle. Now, for anybody who's studied trauma or psychology in school or on their own time, I'm sure that they've come across the idea of the abuse victim cycle. This is by no means the totality of the knowledge needed to be able to step into healing, but it is a step forward for those who have not come in contact with any of this knowledge. So I'm going to try to do the best I can to help explain the dynamic and the relationships between the abuser and the victim, and how one might be able to come out of that. I won't keep this away from home. I will talk a little bit personally about my own experience with this, and I hope that it will help any of those interested in looking deeper into themselves and to get through their traumatic event. I myself have went through an immense amount of trauma and healing throughout my years in my life. I've experienced parental abandonment from both parental figures, physically from one, and it wasn't until way later on in my life, but it was in my early teens, my father had abandoned me emotionally in certain attributes and spiritually. Physically he was there, but he did lose the components of spiritual and emotional components. Now, during my formative years, he was an amazing parent. Not limiting, allowed me to make my own decisions. Like I said, he was reading me many advanced books. I was homeschooled, pretty much raised as an anarchist in many different ways, though I was given the option to choose what I wanted to become. It wasn't like he was forcing me into these ideologies. Actually, he only introduced them to me. He never made it like you had to go through the advanced classes. He allowed me to choose that on my own. So he just showed me that these were potentials, and also showed me how important it was to study things like the founding fathers and their documents. Now, I know some people might not enjoy me speaking about this. They would feel that it's it's not anybody else's business. But it's my choice here to talk about these things, and if I want to talk about these things in my presentation to help other people in their life, then I will. So my mother gave me up to my father, thinking that she was incapable of taking care of me, which was obviously just a way of getting out of her responsibility to take care of her son who needed her in those moments. Though luckily she was a very compassionate person and did hold her conscience later on and mended the relationship, and we did end up making amends together, and she has done everything she can every time she sees me to atone for that. And I have forgiven her for that, though it is not an easy process. To get right into this, an individual that has fallen prey to the abuse victim cycle has either one or both of these characteristics. They have either identified with the abuser and thus become an abuser later on in their life, or they have identified with the victim and thus become the victim in their life. And they become both of these in certain scenarios. Actually, more likely than not, most people are going back and forth. Though I would say there's a primary imbalance going on. One more so, let's say you're like, in your daily life, you're more so the abuser when you're at work, when you're in the position of boss above other people that you feel that you're an authority over. If you're in like a business environment and you're like the manager of this business, and you have this authority idea running through your head, well, you end up expressing very abusive attitudes. If you're in a left brain imbalance, sexually harassing your co-workers, putting down other male co-workers or female co-workers, etc., right? Just different forms of abuse. But maybe when you go home and see your father, you become the victim to him because he happens to be the alpha abuser at home. So there's many dynamics to this. So like a kid who goes out and bullies kids at school as an abuser at school to the victim, but then when he comes home and his dad is the alpha abuser, that's the primary abuser in the relationship, well, you see the kid becomes the victim then he's in the victim mindset. So my point is that we're usually in a relationship between abuser and victim, and depending on the situation and how the ego is being expressed and how this trauma is being expressed, and specifically how you deal with this trauma, how that is being expressed, because that's usually what happens, is that our mind develops certain patterns to deal with trauma, and those patterns get ingrained into our daily habits and into our brains, and then we start to rely on them constantly over and over and over every time a problem occurs. This usually happens when we haven't dealt with the trauma. So if we take a look over here at the slide, healing from abuse, the abuse victim cycle, well, we can see that it's primarily red, and there's only a little bit of green here. So the main thing here is to understand that it starts at the top here where the trauma or chronic abuse is occurring. Okay, and then there's 3 pathways. You have one, experiencer identifies with the abuser. Young male child seeing abuse in his life, his father beating on motherly figures or his mother, mother archetypes in his life, or his mother herself in his life, or also abusing him or his sister, any kind of abuse that's being done to him or his loved ones, and he might identify with that as the stronger of the two and see the female as the weaker of the two taking the abuse, which leads to negative emotions in turn outwardly. As he grows up, he expresses this, as the abuser. So the experiencer becomes the abuser, and he experiences more abuse in his life and creates more abuse in other people's lives. So he starts to abuse other people. And what this means here is that he's abusing himself and he's abusing other people. It's starting with the abuse of the self, because there is a form of trauma that is stored within the subconscious, and he has been identified with the left brain imbalance from this trauma, meaning that he is identified with the father figure as the solution to this trauma. So this is what's happening. The mind is identifying which way to go as the solution. This is what's happening. And two of these are not real solutions. Two of these just end up in the same place, as we're seeing here. So let's say that he has a sister, and his sister identifies with his mother. Experiencer identifies with the victim. So she identifies with the mother, saying in her mind, since the mother is taking the beating and not actually causing the harm and not doing the violence, then she's the stronger of the two because she can take it. Lives in a form of Stockholm Syndrome or Arrested Development. So these negative emotions get turned inwardly towards the self and usually creates deep self-apathy, lack of self-esteem, lack of self-value. Starts to be concerned with how others think and how others look at them and what others think about them. And they victimize themselves. And then they put themselves in situations where they create a scenario where they are the victims, where they become the victims. So they put themselves in situations where they can be victimized by others. And ultimately, this is a form of self-abuse. So you see, this is leading all to the same place. Both of these pathways lead to more abuse to the self, more abuse to others, and more victims. The middle path is the way that we want to go. By not identifying with either the left brain or the right brain imbalance. Not identifying with the mother or the father when they are in this position, when they are both in this abuse victim cycle. And this goes for the individual in that situation as well. Do not identify with the abuser or the victim. So the middle path is about the experiencer is healed through application of knowledge, care, and willpower. Through the will. So we have to have the knowledge, we have to diagnose what's going on, we have to stop lying to ourselves, we have to face the shadow self. We have to care enough to do this, we have to develop self-care and get out of apathy and self-loathing. And we have to have the will to actually commit to all this and make it a regiment in our daily lives and a routine and a living it repetitively. No matter how we might feel about it, we have to develop the care through the willpower, because we might have impulses and old programs coming up that makes us not want to care. Actually, we usually do, stored in the subconscious. So a little bit more on the abuse victim cycle to help people spot some of this. There are 4 stages of an abuser or an abuse victim relationship. First thing, with the abuser or the environment that the abuse is going to take place in, the tension is building, meaning this is the tension stage. Things are starting to build up. You can tell that the glass is getting close to the peak. So the main thing that we're looking for here is triggers for a potentially known abuser. That is especially the case when you're dealing with people who have PTSD and things like brain injuries. I know this personally because my father has had a brain injury. He had his left frontal lobe of his neocortex damaged from a tire exploding in his face. And to say the least, if it wasn't for some of this knowledge, I would not be able to help him in the little ways that I can today. The point of that is you watch for triggers. And things with people like this, triggers happen to be things like self-value, things that relate to their self-value, things that relate to how they view themselves, their worldview, um, something that triggers an emotion or a stimulation of a memory of the past, about themselves or about something that they're very attached to. So, you watch for irritation um, as the tension is building, and then it leads into the triggering happening, right? So sometimes some triggers are unavoidable just because that's how life is, and not everybody knows about these things. So, when you run into contact with people with trauma like this, especially with people with brain injuries, you might trigger them and not know. And then you might think it's yourself because you've identified with the victim, right? Not realizing that there's a lot more going on in the situation. So, then the incident of abuse starts, right? So then the abuser lashes out in a violent way and, turns that energy towards his victim, whoever that might be. It could be the closest person to them, the person that triggered them. It might be somebody that they care about. Usually it is somebody they care about. It's usually not just random people. It's usually the close people, the family members that are getting hurt the most. But after this subdues, you have the reconciliation stage, which is then the abuser recognizes what they have done at some level, and this is like a program that goes on, and then they apologize for it at some way. So they feel bad and they go into these guilt stages, and then they try to turn themselves into the victim, in some way, and they flip back into that victim stage, and then they want you to cater for them afterwards. This is how we build Stockholm Syndrome, right? And then the victim, the actual victim in that scenario, who was just assaulted, let's say the mother in this case, if she has been arrestedly developed or is in a Stockholm Syndrome, she's going to, cater to that individual. This happens with mothers a lot and their children, or, wives and their husbands. And then after that, there's a stage, the fourth stage of calmness, which there's a period of calmness. There's a slight period depending on the situations, right? But there's this period of calmness, and then it leads right back into the next one, which is the tension builds up from this calmness, leading into the abuse again, and then leading into the reconciliation, and then back into the calmness. Okay, so this is that cycle that the abuser will do and the victim will fall into as well. So I hope that makes sense. So now let's speed it up here. So the tree of all evil, as you can see, it's starting with the root, parental abandonment issues, moving up to the trunk of the tree itself, self-loathing due to lack of self-respect, leading up to the branches, fear of owning personal responsibility, and then leading to the leaves, willful ignorance. This abuse victim cycle often starts with parental abandonment issues. So we ask, well, why is the world willfully ignorant, right? Because we're seeing that the world is willfully ignorant. They have the knowledge at their fingertips. They have, libraries in their hands, and they use it to, watch cat videos or something ridiculous like that, instead of studying the occult and understanding crucial information about the world and themselves. Well, I believe that it is coming from many things, but one of these things is definitely parental abandonment issue. This is one major component. And that trauma leads to self-loathing because of the lack of self-respect. Because when you have parental abandonment issues, you feel that you don't have any value, especially the ones who have identified with the victim. You are valueless. Your parents didn't care about you, so why should you care about yourself? And this gets ingrained as a program. A lot of people aren't even conscious of it. And then it goes into fear of owning personal responsibility. So because you have fear of, or because you have self-loathing, and you hate yourself at some deep level, anything that has to do with you taking responsibility for your actions, or like any of your property or things like that, is absolutely terrifying. And an individual in this absolutely abhors responsibility. This can be one of those triggering things. Like anything that touches on the self-loathing and self-respect, anything that touches on the responsibility can trigger these individuals. But then it leads into willful ignorance, which is the willful disregarding of these conditions and of the solutions, which leads to behaviors that violate natural law, which leads to things like moral relativism and man's authority. So I think we are definitely a species of self-loathing, and a species that has, deep trauma rooted within the collective unconscious from thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of years of breaking natural law. And once we heal our personal trauma, then we have to start to move back, like I said, into more layers of the collective trauma to start to heal that. And this is where we start from. So like I was talking about, this is just a good dynamic to get to understand the conscious and subconscious mind. You have the conscious mind, which makes up about 15%, maybe even less than that. Some, psychologists say it could be less than 15%, like putting it at 12%. But this makes up the awake or the aware mind. The main functions of the conscious mind is to process information arriving from the environment through sensory input in order to identify patterns and meanings. So it's about critical thinking, planning, short-term memory, judgment, discernment, decision-making, willpower, and the understanding of natural law and objective morality. And the subconscious mind is the asleep mind, or the unaware mind, which takes up about 85% of the functions of the mind. So the main function of the subconscious mind is to protect the conscious mind from re-experiencing post-traumatic experiences through imagination and visualization. So one might think that this is a good thing. Well, it can be. To a certain extent, but it's not a good thing long term, no matter what, because when you repress these traumas and you never deal with them in the subconscious, like I was talking about earlier, putting it in the closet, then it will surface again, and it will come out in negative ways. So the subconscious deals with the automated body functions, the instinct, fight or flight response, habits, long-term memory, initial emotional responses, so like impulses and things like that. So going into that left brain chronic abusive state, or the abuser state, will lead to things like master think. Chronic left brain dominance creates suppression of the emotion and eventually roots us in the reptilian brain. Okay, and this roots us in, dominator attitude towards others, and excessive ego manipulation onto others. And then you have the victim mentality. Well, this creates that abuser and victim relationship is directly correlated to the master and slave relationship that we have playing out in our world today. So the abuser is actually the master think. The chronic left brain dominance creates suppression of the emotions and eventually roots us in the reptilian complex of the brain. The reptilian complex deals with fight and flight, and when we're working out of the reptilian complex, we care not about morality. We care not about our consequences on the others. Then you have the victim or the slave think, which is a chronic right brain dominance, which creates suppression of the survival instincts and eventually roots us in the mammalian brain, which is about emotions. The emotional complex. So we fall into the victim. Why me? Why did this happen to me? So if you look at that tri-brain attribute, that triune brain, you have the reptilian complex, the mammalian complex, and then you have the neocortex, which is the higher level thinking. And to understand more about this, you can go to my other presentation. I'm just trying to give you a basic overview here. So what we want is actually free think, right? We want to be healed. So this is through that middle path. And this is by bringing both of these attributes together. Not a slave, not a master, not a victim, not an abuser. When both brain hemispheres are in balance, the neocortex acts in its proper role as the executive command center of the human brain, and true intelligence is born. So intelligence, intellect, plus the generative capacity, / creativity. That's what intelligence is. Intel and gents. And this is a quote by Peter James. When something bad happens to you, you have 3 choices. You can either let it define you, let it destroy you, or let it strengthen you. Just like I was speaking about in the previous slide. Passivity as pathology. Can passivity be a psychopathology? Well, yes, it is that, actually. Passivity is at times a powerful weapon, but one must know when its use is of benefit. Most passivity breeds mediocrity, and if not changed, will emerge a mental psychopathology. Passivity is like a stagnation which propagates itself like the scum on a pond. Passivity is a symptom of a chronic right brain imbalance which creates suppression of the sacred masculine principle of consciousness. This leads to giving up our free will and personal responsibility to perform right action over wrong action. And no action in the face of evil is equal to evil. It is an evil action. This generates blind acceptance and collectivist groupthink, leading to a condition in which followers will readily submit to authority. I know so many punks that are passive. Think about that. Passive punks. Sit back and do nothing. It's kind of what this whole presentation has been about, huh? Bunch of pseudo punks. Fake ass punks that have their head up their ass. Just like this guy in this picture over here. Your problem is obvious. It's very obvious to any being that has the eye on and has made the eye single. That can see, who is not a not see, like I was talking about earlier. Passivity in times of slavery is conformity to evil. 100%, and it's not punk or rebellious whatsoever. Unfortunately, the world is stuck in survival mode and not thrival mode or growth. You cannot be in survival and growth at the same time. Epigenetics shows this, and Bruce Lipton can clarify on that for you if you'd like to understand my point in that. But there is a fundamental difference between thriving and surviving. Surviving means to continue, or to live or exist, just to accept the default condition as is, just to continue your existence exactly the way it is, It is the prevention of not surviving. That's what surviving is. The prevention of not surviving. While thriving can be defined as to grow or develop well, to prosper or to flourish. This is about expansion. This is about stepping out of the default conditions to push for betterness. So thriving is what we need to be in for the most part. Now, survival has a very good use. It doesn't mean to not have survival mode. But the problem with survival mode, especially when it's not being used with this other component of thriving, then you, meaning in balance, knowing when to use it and when not to use it, you become rooted in the R complex of the brain, which is, fight and flight. And it actually destabilizes the neocortex, and you're not reaching higher cognitive functions from the neocortex. The command center of the brain is now rooted in the R complex, so that's where all the signals are being commanded from. The lower level sections of the brain, which usually puts us in a dominator mentality. It puts us in reptilian consciousness, not even animal consciousness. Many of us claim to have the goal of thriving, but yet the majority of us still are just surviving. But here's the exciting part. Just thinking about a life beyond surviving puts you closer to thriving. The first step is to determine whether you are in survival mode and to stop lying to yourself. There are plenty of signs, including a fear of change, frustration, and discontentment. Maybe you should pay attention to these. Your feelings might be trying to tell you something. They might be trying to tell you that you are not living to your full potential and purpose. They might be trying to tell you that it's time to change through action. Insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results, Albert Einstein. That's what survival is. It's insanity. You're doing the same thing over and over and over, but yet expecting to thrive. But that's not how survival works. Another psychopathology, self-loathing. This is something else that is deeply entrenched in humanity, not just the punk movement. Everything that I've been talking about can be related back to society, because you're going to find these symptoms all over the place. It's not just in the punk movement. This presentation isn't just about fake-ass punks, if you haven't realized it by now. It's about humanity. And it's about whether we're going to learn these principles and set ourselves free. And to do that, we have to go into the inner realm and do the shadow work on ourselves and deal with these psychopathologies. Self-loathing. Now this is a section from Mark Passio's work. Self-loathing is an underlying psychological condition that causes people to attempt to abdicate their own personal responsibility to exercise conscience and fall into patterns of willful ignorance, order following, and the justification of immoral behavior. Self-loathing is created when earlier trauma has been suppressed and buried into the subconscious mind. Instead of being confronted, dealt with, and healed, the effects of such unresolved trauma often take the form of feelings of inadequacy and unworthiness, whether real, suggested, or imagined. Now, this is what we've been talking about, and this comes back from that cycle of abuse like we were speaking on. And it could go even farther than that. There can be collective trauma. Our species has been traumatized in many different ways collectively, and that can be epigenetically affecting us as well. But at the level of consciousness, in the collective unconsciousness, that's stored there, and one day we're going to have to deal with that stuff. That collective trauma. Not just the personal trauma. Not just your parental abandonment. But the guy on the right here, I have suffered, therefore I shall cause suffering. Well, it sounds like a bunch of punks to me. They like to go out and trash a bunch of other people's stuff, don't they? break a bunch of stuff, break bottles. Well, just remember the definition of punk, which I didn't give in this presentation. I decided to leave it out. I couldn't really find a good definition for it or its origins, but what it does come back to is rotted wood. Rotting wood. Now, I would consider that to be fake-ass punks. You know? Rotted wood. Wood that you can't even burn for heat. But people have been traumatized, so when they've been traumatized, they project that trauma unconsciously and sometimes consciously. And they usually cause suffering onto other people because of that in many different ways. And there's a lot more to that, so just do your own homework into this. And I'm going to give a bunch of solutions for all this, obviously. That's the next section, all the solutions. But these people are locked in their own mental hell and purgatory. A perpetual state of self-suffering and suffering onto others. The internal schism. Not living in harmony with the true self. Torn between the thoughts and emotions and actions. Not in alignment with the self. We want to be in alignment. Thought, emotions, and actions all in alignment. As you think, so you feel, so you act. You don't want internal dualism with your sacred masculine principle of thought and your sacred feminine principle of emotions. You want them to be in the holy alchemical union or wedding and marriage. The alchemical marriage. Unity. But what we need to do is find that inner light to heal from them. But here's a quote from Andrew Bennett. The greatest journey a man will take is 18 inches from his head to his heart. It's coming from Esoteric Empire. Beautiful image. You got to take the journey down into the pit. Take the leap of faith, which is about solutions. The leap of faith is about solutions. So now we're at the end of the presentation. I'm going to go over a few solutions. First of all, solutions, and this goes for all of these psychopathologies. These solutions can really help with these psychopathologies that I was laying out above, or before. Respect, true self-respect and self-reflection is one of the best things and first things that we have to do. What does the word respect mean? Well, it's from Latin, re again, like we were talking about earlier, with rebel and revolution. And spectare, to look at, to look again, like spectator, to be looking. Spectrum, spec, to look. And this means to take another look at yourself. Look in the mirror. Who are you? What have you become? What are your behaviors? What are your thoughts? What are your emotions? If you're still looking for that one person that can change your life, just take a look in the mirror and that person will be looking back at you. Time to take another look at yourself. If you don't take the time, you won't have the time. So internal self-reflection and observation is the first step. Stop lying to yourself and look at yourself. Dismantle the ego. Next is remembering who we truly are. Knowledge of the self. Like I was talking about just a moment ago, we need alignment between thoughts, emotions, and actions. Mind, body, and spirit. We need the alchemical marriage. The alchemical marriage. You turn the eye on. And on the right hand, we have a little diagram about expressions and fulfillment and failure. Thought, fulfillment, knowledge, understanding, and wisdom. Failure, ignorance, foolishness, and naivete. Emotions, fulfillment, true care, empathy, compassion, failure, apathy, indifference, callousness, action, courage, willpower, persistence, failure, cowardliness, laziness, and submission. We need to remember who we truly are and go down this left column here, thoughts, emotions, and actions. You know, we need to have the knowledge and the understanding and the wisdom. We need to have the true care, the empathy, and the compassion. We need the courage, the willpower, and the persistence to make a better world and to make a better self. First starting with the self, obviously. To make a better self and to make a better world. So we have to remember, meaning bringing back the member. Bringing the members together, you know. These members of consciousness have to be brought back together again. Remembering who we truly are. Knowledge of the true self. This is crucial. So respect. You look in. Then you remember. You bring it together. It's not about looking in the past, remembering. In this context, we're looking at bringing members together, as in doing over and taking different components that are members and conjoining them and aligning them and building from that. Next is take personal responsibility. You know, danger, personal responsibility area. Responsibility, you know, transforming values into actions. It's our ability to respond. That's what that word is, responsibility, our ability to respond. You know, with great consciousness comes great responsibility. I crossed out the power there, but knowledge is the pathway to power, but it's not power itself. But with great consciousness comes the great ability to respond. You know, with a great ability to respond comes a great responsibility. Knowledge is the pathway to power, not power itself. So David Icke said, accept responsibility for yourself and your actions, thoughts, and your words. You accept responsibility for yourself, your actions, thoughts, and words. You alone make choices. You alone are answerable to the consequences of your behavior. The feeble excuse that your boss required it, the establishment expected it, holds no truth or justification. Responsibility. So now you remembered who you are. Now you got to take responsibility for what you have done and what you are doing and what you're going to do. What you're going to do with this knowledge. What is your ability to respond? Transforming your values into actions. So now we're at the 2 pillars of enlightenment. The 2 pillars of enlightenment are about the sacred feminine and sacred masculine components of consciousness. This is about that remembering again. But we start first with the sacred feminine pillar of non-violence, also known as non-aggression. I like the non-violence pillar. Aggression is a little bit ambiguous to a lot of people. The non-violent principle, I think it's straightforward. The first pillar is the sacred feminine pillar of non-violence. This principle states, do not immorally initiate non-rightful use of physical power, violence, to coerce, constrain, or manipulate the rightful physical behavior or free will choice of any sentient being. So do not initiate violence. You know, the sacred feminine pillar of consciousness. The sacred masculine pillar of self-defense. This is the second pillar. This principle states that all sentient beings always bear the inherent right to use force to deter and defend themselves away from the initiation of violence conducted upon them or another. So this is about the do no harm and take no shit principle. Self-defense is not violence, like I explained earlier. And we always have the right to defend ourselves against violence. Know the difference. Knowing the difference makes all the difference. So now you integrate both of these and fuse them together. The fusion of the sacred masculine and sacred feminine pillar. The intel, the masculine section. The gents, the feminine, the creative. So the intel is the thought, and the linear and the scientific. So the intel is the information, and gens is the generative, the creative aspect. And then the middle pillar is the I. So intelligence, So it's the intelligence, the true intelligence. That's what true intelligence is remembering, bringing the members back together to create homeostasis within our consciousness. This is the third pillar of equilibrium, and this is the pillar of right action, moral action, based on both of the previous pillars, meaning doing no harm and taking no shit, non-violence, and self-defense. Spiritual currencies, time and attention. How are we spending our time? What are we paying attention to? What kind of quality am I getting in return for the investments of my spiritual currency? True currency is your time and attention. What you pay attention to, what you spend your time on. That's why we say those phrases. Whatever information or endeavors we put our time and attention towards, we end up getting change in return for that investment. Therefore, we should seek to improve the quality of our attention by placing it upon such things that can improve ourselves and the human condition as a whole. Okay, are we like the people in the top over here, putting in shit, being the toilets for the mass media that's completely controlled by these dark occultists that I've been speaking about? The cult of the black sun? Look into Mark Passio's work, Demystifying the Occult. He'll tell you all about who runs this show. Or are we doing what this individual in the bottom is doing, putting our time in deep study, specifically into the occult? Because we're not moving anywhere until people understand the occult. That's why the punk movement's not going anywhere. That's why humanity's not going anywhere, because we don't have a deep fundamental understanding of the occult. And we don't spend our time and attention on critical things. We dilly-dally around and spend our time and attention on fashion in the punk scene. Well, at least they do. I don't, obviously. Good luck with that. But you should be studying. You should be reading as much as possible. Spend your spiritual currency wisely. So let's take a look at this diagram on the right here. How our quality of attention affects our world. The world is that pool at the bottom. Those buckets are the individuals. Okay? And each of those buckets have a faucet at the bottom of it that goes into that world pool. Above those buckets is the pure information stream and the poisoned information stream. So what happens if we spend most of our attention inputting poison into the individual bucket and then outputting poison into the world? What's going to happen to that pool? Well, it's going to become poison. The flow of that poison is going to stream into that world. That's how manifestation works. Most people have that faucet all the way on, just cranked up, right? But what would happen if we turned that faucet off and we started to turn on the faucet of the pure information stream? Well, we could clean up that pool pretty quick, especially with a good filtration system on it. With good information, right? We'll clean it up real quick. So this is what we need to do. We need to clean the world pool up by putting in better information into the individual and then outputting better information into the pool. You get what you pay for, or you reap what you sow. It's karma. So if you're putting time and attention in to crap, you're going to get crap, and the world's going to get crap because you are not changing. You are not putting in the good information into yourself and then outputting good information into the world. We're getting exactly what we deserve as a species. Might not like that, but guess what? That's the truth. based on what we are putting into the world right now, collectively, we're getting exactly what we deserve. We reap what we sow. Change is necessary. This society does not want you to become wise. If people are wise, they cannot be controlled, subjugated, and exploited. The truly intelligent cannot be forced to live like robots. In fact, they will have the fragrance of rebellion around them. The condition of this society is bullshit. Only weak and uneducated minds follow the ideals of a society that has fallen into madness. Rebellion against the current condition is the only way to truly grow. We must reject the illusionary worldview that has been grafted from birth upon us through social engineering. The answers are innately within each one of us. The study of the components of consciousness is of all importance to the initiate and those who want real change. Each step towards higher consciousness is a journey made by following the heart-based intelligence instead of following the crowd, and by choosing knowledge over the veils of ignorance. The wise man is a fire, alive, a flame. He would rather die than be enslaved. If you're serious about change, you have to go through the uncomfortable situations and stop trying to dodge the process. It is the only way to grow. Next solution is about positive thinking. Now, this is something I have issues with, especially in our current times. And I know a lot of people have issues with positive thinking, but it is one of the most important and powerful solutions that one can have. We have to be more positive and optimistic so that we can behave optimally. We want the most optimal behaviors, the right actions. Optimize. Be like Optimus Prime, the Prime Optimus. The Prime Optimus is understanding natural law and applying that understanding into manifestation. So positive thinking. Positive thinking is crucial for self-change, for it holds the key to reprogramming your subconscious mind. Using a daily routine of repetition and positive affirmation can help to retrain one's own thoughts, emotions, and actions, which leads to tremendous improvements in one's own life. Most people end up dwelling in negative thoughts, and they become habitually hardwired to these thoughts through repetition. Knowing this, now we can reverse it and rewire ourselves by repetitively thinking in the most optimal fashion, which includes facing the negative but not dwelling upon it. So when I say positive thinking, I don't mean just all bliss and happiness, I mean including looking at the negative. But we have to positively look at the negative. See, that's something a lot of people don't get. You can positively look at the negative and not be the negative and not become negative. You have to have strong willpower and strong understanding about the self. Strong mindset, strong emotions. But you are capable of transforming negativity into positivity. And by doing that, you are the alchemist. You have now understood the alchemical process. Being positive in the face of negativity is the best thing that we can do. And I don't mean like, oh, there's a tornado coming at my house, so I should be singing and dancing and just ignoring it. No, that's not the positive I'm talking about. I'm talking about we can positively succeed in surviving if we do what we need to do in the situation. That's what I'm talking about. Until you change your thinking, you will always recycle your experiences. We must first liberate our own minds from the erroneous dogma and illusions that are binding us. True freedom begins in your mind. Cause and effect. This is some of the most important knowledge, if not the most important knowledge, next to natural law. We need to understand cause and effect. And for a really deep understanding of this, I would recommend my first presentation, an aggregated synthesis of occult knowledge. In the Hermetic Principles section, I go over cause and effect very in-depthly. The plane of causality is the mental world, or the world of the why. All power to effect change lies here. Thus, this is where human consciousness must go if we are to create real change. This is where causes are set into motion prior to manifesting as formed realities. This plane of causality constitutes the why, or the underlying causal factors which precede all manifested things and events. The plane of effects is the physical world, manifestation. There is absolutely no power to effect change here. But this is where human consciousness is imprisoned and stuck. I liken this to rearranging the chairs on the Titanic. Imagine a person cuts themselves over and over and over, and then you give them a Band-Aid as the totality for that solution. So you start to mass produce Band-Aids. The whole world is in this condition. Cutting themselves and cutting others. Sadomasochistic. And then we're all just prescribing Band-Aids to each other as the solution for that problem. Well, there is no solution at that level. Because what is causing that cut to reopen, or those cuts to form, over and over and over, has started in the mind. So let's say you were cutting the same spot over and over. Well, you would be reopening the same wound. And if you wanted it to heal, you would have to change what is causing the reopening of that wound, which is changing the mind, which changes the behavior. So the mind is where we must go. This is about non-dualism as well, between spirit and matter. Matter being the physical world, and spirit being the mental world. Like I talked about earlier, psyche, meaning spirit or soul. The metaphysical. Rise, resist, and rebel. This is about the one great work of truth, love, and freedom. This logo on the right is from whatonearthishappening.com. Mark Passio. Again, probably said his name like 5 times already, but it's good, positive repetition. The true great work is the arduous task of rising out of your own ego bullshit to influence others to abandon their false dogmatic beliefs, which are impeding and tying back the progress of human evolution by ignoring natural law and truth. True rebellion is the act of opposing, resisting of all the claims of authority and government, man's law, and to stop condoning the false notion of the legitimacy of slavery. The ultimate responsibility to truth, love, and freedom, which is the rebellion of the unnatural dark world of unnecessary chaos, suffering, and slavery. True rebels resist and confront the evil that most people refuse to acknowledge. Authentic punks prefer dangerous freedom over peaceful slavery. The one great work is to end slavery. That's what the great work is all about. Humanity's magnum opus is to end slavery. Rising up and morally resisting is the ultimate rebellion against slavery. When injustice becomes law, resistance becomes a duty. Healers are spiritual warriors who have found the courage to defeat the darkness of their souls, awakening and arising the depths of their deepest fears, like a phoenix rising from the ashes, reborn with wisdom and strength that creates a light that shines bright enough to help enrage and inspire others out of their own darkness. In times of world enslavement, resistance becomes a moral obligation. The resurrection of the rebel. The resurrection of the rebel is a flame of the phoenix that has been reborn out of the ashes of the ego mind. The anger of the rebel is the fire of truth. It can only burn those who reject its gifts. Those who lie and who are deceitful will burn away in the face of truth. Those who become the flame of truth have the eternal torch that will light and guide the path in times of darkness and help to light others' torches. In a time when passivity is trendy and conformity is seen as virtue, the rebel becomes of the highest value. when the flame of individuality has all but diminished, the rebel will be the first people flock to for that flame, lighting the minds of men like setting brush fires in the wind, blazing the way for freedom and prosperity. You can tell the greatness of a man by what makes him angry. Abraham Lincoln. We have a few final quotes here. Albert Camus said, "What is a rebel? A man who says no, like Neo in the Matrix, when he realizes his potential as the one, and he stops the bullets. He turns to the system and says, no, no more. The thing worse than rebellion is the thing that caused rebellion." Frederick Douglass. Real spirituality is the greatest rebellion there is. It is risky. It is adventurous. It is dangerous. Osho. How about that? And here's some wise words from one of our greatest founding fathers, if not the greatest, Samuel Adams. "The truth is, all might be free if they valued freedom and defended it when they ought." JFK said, "Those who make peaceful revolution impossible will make violent revolution inevitable." Now remember, I'm not advocating for a violent revolution, but if we don't evolve and revolve consciousness, revive it, then, we have to have the revolution of consciousness. If we don't have that, then there will be a violent revolution. No doubt, at some point. We're already starting to see it in certain areas, in microcosmic areas in the world. We need to learn the principles of natural law. When tyranny becomes law, rebellion becomes duty. Thomas Jefferson. Well, right now, tyranny is law. All over the place. During times of universal deceit, telling the truth becomes a revolutionary act. George Orwell. When freedom is outlawed, only outlaws will be free. And guess what? Freedom is outlawed. And if you don't recognize the symbol in the background, it is a rising phoenix, or the rebel symbol from Star Wars. Punk is not dead, though a lot of people think it is. But there are only dead punks. There's no doubt about that. There's a bunch of dead punks out there. The inner rebel must be awakened. Show yourself that you are not a fake-ass punk. You got to have the guts to accept the truth. Freedom is the highest spiritual truth. Rebels will fight to defend freedom mentally and physically. Resistance to slavery is the path of the most hardcore punk, rebel, and anarchist. It is the very essence of rebellion to be in alignment with truth, natural law, and freedom. Thank you very much for your participation in watching this and listening. I hope that you find something of great value in this information. And remember, resurrect the rebel, the flame from within. Truth, love, and freedom are worth fighting for. And it's time for us to get that in our heads and our hearts and to do something about it. And this doesn't mean a violent revolution. In no way is this presentation about a violent revolution. This is about the evolution of consciousness, the fire of the mind, not literal fire, metaphorical, the mind's fire.